Well, hello, it's Pastor Doug here to tell you another Jack tale. Hope that you've been enjoying these and you've been learning more about how we might live our lives for the Lord. I'm going to share one today that's called Jack and the Northwest Wind. Now, it happened a long time ago whenever Jack and his mama were living all alone out in their cabin. Will had done gone off to seek his fortune, had did Tom, and his daddy was out taking care of things, and so it was just Jack and his mama. And it was getting along close to winter, and boy, that northwest wind was a blowing in. It'd come right in through the slats on their old cabin and just freeze them nearly to death. Why, Jack could get out there and he'd chop up wood, but it wouldn't take long for him to burn through it just trying to stay warm. And then as it got into the winter, they wasn't having a whole lot to eat, and they was getting together and just talking about it and not being very kind about it. And Jack's mama was sort of complaining about how cold it was, and why, Jack just decided that he would go and stop up that northwest wind. He said, "Ma, I know what I'll just do. I'll just go up there and find out wherever that wind is a-coming from. It's probably coming out of some old hole in the mountain or something like that. I'll just plug it up and there won't be no more wind a-coming our way, and we won't have to worry about that." Why, his mama said, "Oh, law, Jack, don't you know nothing? That you can't stop the wind. The wind is always a-blowing." But Jack was having none of it. He just got it in his mind to exactly what he'd do. And so he got out for about a week and he piled up a bunch of wood so his mama would stay warm, made sure that she had everything she needed to be off by herself, and off he went. Why, he hadn't gone really too far until he come across an old man in the woods. Had a long gray beard, and he was just looking at Jack and came up to him and says, "Oh, Jack, won't you come on up to my house? Where you going these days?" Jack says, "Oh, I'm going to go stop the northwest wind." The old man said, "Oh, that's a mighty long ways, Jack. I don't know if you'll make it in a day. You might need to rest up. You've already traveled a pretty good ways to get here. And why, if you come with me, I'll get you something to eat so that you'll be good and full to go the rest of your way. How's your mama doing? You didn't leave her there all by herself, did you?" He says, "Oh, yeah, I made sure she had everything she needed. She'll be just fine." He says, "Oh, I don't know about that, Jack. You know, if you just had something to take care of her a little better with, why, that's about all you'd really need. You wouldn't have to worry about the wind." Jack's got to thinking that that might be right, and so the old man got Jack coming into his house, and when he got in there, there on his table, on this beautiful tablecloth, was a meal like Jack had never seen before in his whole days. Why, there was all kinds of breads and meats, and Jack just sat down. The two of them just ate as much as they could, and when they got through, Jack was about ready to offer to clean things up when that old man just took the corners of that tablecloth, pulled it up together, and it all just disappeared. He said, "No, Jack, this is a magic tablecloth. I'm gotten older now, just here by myself. I don't really need everything that this tablecloth will provide, and why, I'm willing to give it to you as long as you take it straight back to your mama and you share with her." And Jack says, "Oh, that's great, that's great. I'd love to have it. How's it work?" And so he just spread it out on the table and he said, "Oh, just clap your hands 3 times and say, 'Food, come food.'" And that tablecloth just started a moving and shaking, and pretty soon there was all kinds of food right there in the middle of it. And whenever you took up the corners and laid them up together, it all went away. Why, Jack says, "Oh, that's the very thing I need, very thing I need." So he got up early the next morning and started headed out back to home. Now the old man said, "Now, Jack, there's only one thing you can't do. On your way home, you'll pass right by an old boy's house. They've got 3 or 4 boys out there. They're always up to no good. They're going to try to get you in there, and if they do, they'll steal that tablecloth from you." Jack says, "Oh, I'll listen to you. I will. I won't worry about that." But whenever Jack got down that way, since his brothers Will and Tom was gone, he was a little bit lonesome. And when them boys got to playing out there, he kind of looked at 'em with a longing eye, and pretty soon found himself going right up to 'em and seeing if he couldn't play too. Why, they played all kinds of games, and Jack had the best time. When it was getting close to evening, they says, "Oh, where you headed to, Jack?" He says, "Oh, I'm headed on back home." And they said, "Oh, you won't get there before it gets dark. There's no telling what might happen to you in the dark. Why, what you need to do is just come in here and stay with us." So Jack did. Why, he played nearly every game with that old tablecloth tucked under their arm. They got to teasing him and got to laughing at him about not letting it go and wondering what was so special about some old tablecloth. And whenever Jack finally broke down and told them what was so special about it, why, they just behoffed and laughed and carried on and told Jack that he didn't know what he was a-talking about. And so Jack felt like he needed to prove it. And so he laid that tablecloth out, he clapped his hands and said, "Food, come food." And pretty soon, all kinds of manner of grub just started showing up there. Why, those boys and their daddy and their mama and Jack ate that evening, and they got full and warm. And whenever Jack put that tablecloth together and everything went away, why, they couldn't believe it themselves. Why, Jack tucked it under his arm and found him a place a little bit later, and with all that food and a warm fire, he just slept off as quick as nothing, and it was a sound sleep. So later that night, them boys found some cloth that looked pretty near that tablecloth, and they just switched it out. When Jack got up in the morning, Jack's mama had already made up a good breakfast for 'em, and they ate it, and Jack went on his way just as merrily as could be. When he got home, his mama says, "Oh, Jack, you hadn't been gone very long, and that wind is still blowing. I guess you just couldn't stop it, could you?" He says, "Oh, Mama, I never even got that far." And then he told him about the adventure with the old gray-bearded man and the boys stopping and having a good time with them. And then she says, "Oh, well, then you're going to have to show me how this old tablecloth works." And of course, when he spread it out and he clapped his hands and said, "Food, come food," why, nothing happened. His mama just looked at him and says, "Oh, Jack, I know you love stories, and I know that you've seen some pretty wild things in your days, but why, Jack, this is just not the way to go about it." Jack couldn't believe that it wouldn't work at home. And the more he thought about it, he just figured that old gray-bearded man had just tricked him somehow or another. And so he decided, after a few days of that wind coming in and being so cold, that he'd set out to stop that wind once and for all. Why, he took out going there, and when he got close to where he thought that old gray-bearded man lived, why, he went off over into the fields to get around from him so he wouldn't come near him, wanted to get on by so he could get on to his way of stopping that wind. But sure enough, out there in the woods, that old gray-bearded man come across Jack. Says, "Oh, Jack, what you doing up here? I figure you'd be at home with your mama eating good food and not worrying about the wind." He says, "Oh, about that old tablecloth, that thing didn't work. I got it home. It didn't do nothing at all. I think you're just some kind of a magic man that it works around here, but not at my home." And that old man says, "Well, Jack, tell me how you got there. Did you go straight home like I told you to?" Jack said, "Well, no." "Did you stop at that boy's place?" "Yes." "Well, I'll tell you what, Jack, they stole it from you. That's what happened." He says, "But don't mind that. We'll just let them go as they can. I got something else that might help out your mama and you and get you on through these cold days." And so that old man went out into his hen house and brought this old rooster in. And as they got into there, he says, "Now, Jack, this is a special rooster. Why, whenever you clap your hands and say, 'Lay, rooster, lay,' why, that rooster is going to lay a coin that you could use to take into town and buy yourself some food." Why, Jack never heard of such a thing. He says, "Roosters don't lay eggs. Everybody knows that. There's no way that could happen." And so that old man showed him, had that old rooster, clapped his hands, said, "Lay, rooster, lay," and sure enough, out came a nice big old gold coin, and he could use that thing, and he just thought of all the things he could buy with it. Why, Jack couldn't believe his good luck, and of course the next day the old man says, I don't really need a lot around here anyway, so you take this rooster and you get straight back to your mama. Now when you get close to that boy's house, you go away from it. Don't get near it. They'll pull you in, steal this rooster right from you. Jack didn't worry about that. He knew exactly how strong he was. He wasn't going to get fooled twice. And so he went on down through there, and as he got to the old boy's place, he noticed they was out there at all. But he went on down the road, but whenever he came along to them, they was out in the road playing kick the can. It looked like a lot of fun. He hadn't played kick the can since Will and Tom was around, and so he just joined right in with them. Why, they played kick the can, and then they played hide and seek, and he had the best time. In fact, he just spent the rest of the day there and in almost to the night. Of course, they got to teasing him, running around with that old rooster in his arm, and they started to giving him a hard time, and whenever he told him what was special about it, they made him prove it, and Jack, not wanting to be known as a liar, showed him how it worked. And that night, after a great big meal that their mama had cooked for him, why, he just fell off to sleep. And of course, the next day when he got up, he got that rooster in his arm and went on home. But it wasn't the right rooster, so when he got home and tried to show his mama what that rooster could do, it wouldn't do nothing. But his mama, being a resourceful kind of soul, said, don't worry about that, Jack. At least we get one meal out of it. And they had a nice fried chicken dinner and ate really well that one night. But the next morning and through the night, the day got colder and that north wind was a-blowing, and Jack just determined that he'd go stop it up surely one more time. And this time he wouldn't get tricked along the way of keeping off from his purpose. So he got up in the morning, made sure there was plenty of wood for his mama, and got plenty of creek water up in the well, and they had everything they needed to get along for a while he was going out to stop that northwest wind. Sure enough, as he was trying to sneak on by that old man's house, he come across him. That old man just looked at Jack and says, oh, Jack, what you stalking around here for? I thought you'd be at home. I figured you might be going into town to get you something that you might need to get you on by this cruel winter. And so Jack had to tell him that he was just mad at him because he'd given him a tablecloth that wouldn't work at home and gave him a rooster that wouldn't work at home. And that old man said, why, Jack, you just tell me the truth. Did you stop at that boy's house? And Jack had to admit that he had, and he says, you know, them boys stole that rooster from you and put one in there that just didn't have the magic in it. Jack didn't know what to think, but it started to make a little bit of sense to him. And so he says, I'll tell you what, Jack, I got one more prize that I'll give to you. He says, you see all that wood I got stacked up? And Jack looked at it and says, oh, I know. I have to chop my wood for my mama, and it takes all my day, nearly, to get through the winter. He says, well, I'll tell you what. I've gotten to where I don't need as much wood as I used to, and I've got myself a magic axe here. And it does everything for me, and why, it could do it for you too. So that'd give you plenty of time for you to get some other kind of work so that you could take care of things. And so that's exactly what his mind was a-reeling about. Whenever that old man showed him how to make that axe work by clapping his hand and saying, chop, axe, chop, and that axe just started to chopping, why, it would block up the wood, and then it would split the wood, then it would stack the wood, and that was a beautiful thing. Jack just imagined all the time he'd have to be able to take care of his mama. So he took that old axe and he went on down, but as he was going through, he started to thinking that perhaps that old axe might come in handy in a way that might help him get his other stuff back. So when he got there, he saw them boys, he started to playing with them, but he kept his wits about him. When they started to telling him about all the things they were doing and all the games that they were playing, they had a fantastic time. But in the very end of things, they wanted to know how that axe worked. And Jack says, oh, it's a secret. Why, I can't tell you, because even if I told you, that axe would go into working, and then it just, no telling, it might chop everything down. He told them it was a dangerous tool and it just might tear up their whole place. And so Jack didn't tell them how it worked, but they had seen that tablecloth and they had seen that rooster, and so they knew there was something about that axe. And so in the middle of the night, them boys switched it out. And so in the morning, whenever Jack got up and had that nice meal, and actually they even gave him a coin to get him on by since they were being so generous. And at that, Jack just looked at that axe and he says, well, I guess you've been so good to me, I'll go ahead and show you how this axe worked. And he clapped his hands and said, axe, chop axe. And not that one, but one that was out by the wood pile started to whacking and a chopping. Why, it chopped up the wood that was there and stacked it up, and then it just went on moving right up to the house. Why, it started chopping on the porch and started moving in, and as it did, they were all in a panic. They was afraid it'd chop the house up and them too, and that's exactly what Jack warned them about. They'd better come clean and get back what belonged to him, or he'd just let that axe chop them all up. Well, they finally gave in and gave to Jack what belonged to him, and he took it all up and made his way on back home. And when he got there, he showed his mama how that tablecloth worked, and they had the best meals all winter long. He showed them how that old rooster would lay a coin, and they was able to go into town and get themselves what they needed, a little cornmeal and a little meat every now and then, but not too much. And then Jack would sit back as that axe took care of all that wood. And he didn't worry about the northwest wind anymore because he had everything he needed. What the man didn't tell him is that it would work for that winter and get them through just like he said. But at the end of them cold days, as the spring came on, all those things they was given was gone because, well, they didn't really need them no more because it was a warm and beautiful day and they could get to working for themselves. And that's the end of that. Now, I tell you that story because our Heavenly Father gives us good gifts too. And sometimes we can squander them away and we can use those things for things they weren't intended and even give them away. But whenever we use the gifts that God has given us as He intended for them, His provision will be made clear and we can give Him thanks for all that He does for us. And that's the end of that.